We're thrilled that you're here because one of the big themes that has accelerated over the last year is sustainability and social responsibility. Consumers are leaning into social change more than ever before, and not just with words, but with their wallets. So according to Accenture, 63% of global consumers prefer purchasing from companies that align with their values. And we're really excited to bring you this panel, The Activist Consumer: Why Social Responsibility and Sustainability Matter. The companies on this panel not only serve the activist consumer, but they inspire all of us to make the world a more environmental friendly and inclusive place. It's with great pleasure that I welcome Alex Waldman, co-founder, chief creative officer of Universal Standard, Jennifer Patrick, global branding and packaging director at Patagonia, Chris Bixby, VP of growth at Sezzle, and it's moderated by Danny Parisi, fashion reporter at GLOSSY. Please join me in welcoming them to the Commerce Next IRL stage.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me. We're all very excited to talk about this topic, the activist consumer. We'll get into the definition of that in a minute, but I just wanted to say I recently have been getting into running. I've been a very bad runner my entire life, which is not good for playing soccer. But I was trying to buy a new pair of running shoes, and practically every running shoe brand or athletic brand out there, while I was looking for shoes, has sustainable materials or ethically sourced or a little green leaf next to the product. And it was interesting to me that even the brands that I know from talking to them care less about it than others, at least do the token, little green symbol next to the product name. I think it's no secret that people are very conscious about what they buy. There are a lot of things that you can't control in the world, but one thing you can control is your consumption. And I think it makes sense for brands to try and figure out the best way to service those people. So we've got a great panel here. We're going to talk about that consumer, who they are, and the best ways to reach them. So Veronica already introed everybody, but Alex, Jennifer, and Chris are all here. Thank you guys so much for being here. Do you want to do a very brief intro of your companies and yourselves, or do you want to jump right into it? What do you think? Let's do it. Alex, you want to just do a quick intro?
Sure. My name is Alex Waldman. I am the co-founder and creative director of a brand called Universal Standard. This is a brand that was born to sort of consolidate fashion and not have two completely separate groups of consumers, where you have 30% of American women who have access to absolutely everything, and then 70% of American women who have to go up to the furniture floor in a department store and dig through things that are just subpar. So we created Universal Standard to sort of spearhead the idea that fashion should be for everyone, and it should not be made into the average and then the specialty group, especially when we're talking about 70-30. And we really hope that we can change the market overall into this way of thinking.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I'm Jennifer Patrick. I'm the Director of Global Packaging and Branding at Patagonia. Patagonia is an outdoor company with a mission to save the home planet and acts very much like an activist company. So I'm excited to be here.
Chris?
Hi, everyone. I'm not Veronica, who was originally on the schedule. My name is Chris Bixby. I'm the VP of growth at Sezzle, a purpose-driven payments company in Minneapolis. Our mission is to financially empower the next generation, and we're taking a stand against consumers being taken advantage of by a broader, kind of more traditional credit system. We have over 40,000 retailers and 8 million users, and I actually had the chance to lead our rebranding initiative before moving into my current role.
Great. So Chris, I'm going to direct this first question to you, but for all these questions, whoever wants to jump in, please do. And I'm sure we'll have follow-ups and digressions as well. But Chris, so when we use the phrase activist consumer, who is that consumer to you, and what does that phrase mean to you? Is it a certain demographic or a certain, I don't know, who do you think of?
Yeah, I think activist consumer to me, and the way we think about it, is really about a mindset. It's really about someone who makes purchasing decisions and really life decisions based on brands, services, and people around them and the values that they stand for. And so it's someone that makes the purchase with their wallet, and makes that decision I think as we think of this activist consumer, we typically think of a younger generation. It can really be all generations, but we really have done a lot of work on Gen Z in particular, where kind of millennials have been the generation of disruption and kind of changed industries and supply chains and direct-to-consumer models. This new generation of Gen Z has come in and really started to take a stand. So they're the first generation, at least in the US, that's more than 50% non-white. They're much more globally minded in terms of the way they think about, both the environment, their impact, and the world. And then they're also very inclusive and really care about things like equity, transparency, et cetera. So when we look at it, it's that generation that grew up kind of in the recession, and a lot of their mindset has shifted because of that. And so they're also really care about things like financial wellness and sustainability in a way that we've never seen this before, I think. And I think that's where we look at our consumer. So this activist consumer is someone that, again, is passionate. And I think where we look at it, it's much more than just a demographic. It's more about that mindset that kind of comes into true generational shifts.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've seen, I think you're right. Obviously, it transcends age, but the younger generation is much more of an activist consumer. And it should be noted their purchasing power is kind of growing over time, too, so they're less ignorable as a consumer segment, too.
You could also just call them the future consumers.
Yeah.
This is the new normal that we're heading towards. So paying attention to how things are changing is really preparing yourself for what's coming up. I think that's very important for anyone and any brand.
Absolutely, and I think it's an interesting thing to think about, especially with the panel that we have up here. I mean, being at Patagonia, when we think about the activist consumer, it's not about age, race, it's more aligned with what you're believing in, right? Like if it's human, women's rights, voting's rights, but I think it's also interesting to kind of expand upon that and think about the divisive times that we're in and how people are aligning even outside of maybe these norms with what they believe in because of just where we are globally in this world.
So, Jennifer, I have a follow-up question for you. I obviously think of Patagonia as one of those brands that's deeply entwined with the cause, specifically environmental justice, but lots of other things too. How much, in your mind, does the fact that Patagonia has such a strong pedigree in environmental activism impact the actual purchases? Like, obviously, I think it's a positive association. There are, I'm sure, plenty of Patagonia customers who that's a bonus to them. But do you think that is what's bringing people to the brand in the first place, or is it just sort of the product is good and it works for what they need, and on top of that, it's also, aligns with their values?
Oh yeah, it's a huge driver for us. I mean, Patagonia continually takes a firm stance against what it believes in, and the business continues to grow. I think a really good example of that is in 2016, when Trump got elected, we said for that Black Friday, we're gonna donate all of our sales, global sales. And on that day alone, instead of doing 2.5 million, we did $10 million that year in sales on that day. And 1/3 of those customers were new. So I think that scenario alone really proves that this activist consumer is putting their money where their beliefs are.
Right, I think that's a good proof point because there's nothing different about that day other than that effort. So, Alex or Chris, do you have any thoughts on? Is that what brings people into the brand in the first place?
I think people are starting to care about it more and more. I think there is a hierarchy of needs, especially with a majority of the consumers that we cater to. But it is becoming unavoidable. You can no longer not care. When your T-shirt costs as much as a sandwich, somebody's paying that price. Somebody's got their baby on a concrete floor while they're working 20 hours or whatever it is. And I think that people have really woken up to that or are beginning to really wake up to that. And it's becoming harder and harder to say, I don't care. I have my two T-shirts for $5.99. That's amazing. I think people, this is, as you mentioned, this is a time of change. And the change that is happening is literally, it's creating a much more conscious human being, obviously consumer being one of the aspects of being a human being.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just say that, as we see, like 80% of these consumers, and typically younger, but we're following all consumers too, but 80% want to know what a company cares about in terms of, environmental, sustainable, kind of other issues, and they make purchasing decisions based on that. I think we're kind of even talking about this panel kind of coming up. I think what we look at as the activist consumer can be very broad in terms of what they care about, and so Patagonia has, a view of the world and really has a consumer base that's very loyal to them. And Universal Standard has another view in terms of inclusivity. And I'd say we have another kind of view of the world, which is, providing access to a consumer that's typically left behind. And I think as we talk about the activist consumer, it can take different kind of mindsets and different shifts, based on what we care about. But I think the theme kind of throughout is that we all care about something very passionately. And that needs to be reflected in everything we do to continue to, see that consumer really cares about us as a brand.
Yeah, I was going to say, I also feel like there's a loss of neutrality, both in consumption, but just in all aspects of life. People aren't neutral and about really anything, and companies are made of people. There's no reason that you need to be neutral too. And I know even in my experience as a journalist, there's been a lot of reckoning in journalism with the idea of objectivity. Can you truly be objective, and is it worthwhile to give equal credence to climate activists and fossil fuel executives who say climate change is fake? Like, is that really serving the public the best by weighing those things as equal? So I think people are just more okay with just not being neutral about stuff. And like I said, your businesses are made of people and you're people. There's no reason that you have to aspire to some mythical sense of neutrality that will win you all customers when it doesn't really work that way. Alex, I had a question for you. So I think the values and the causes that you care about and that a Universal Standard is about is sort of built into the business model. But do you have any thoughts on how to effectively communicate those values through marketing, through messaging, through the language that you use, or in more subtle ways in just the layout of the online store and stuff like that? So
I think the
any
most
thoughts on that?
important thing is, and this is not from a chest beating values, morality sort of sense alone, but authenticity. Authenticity is the baseline for everything. Consumers are smart. They can smell bull from a mile away. They are very educated. They understand when somebody's being performative. They understand when somebody's being earnest. And they expect a consistency of behavior in order to believe in your brand. You can't just donate $5,000 to something and then do nothing for a year. They have an incredible savvy when it comes to sort of sniffing out the dubious. So authenticity is key, and it's the keystone around which everything falls. So once you have that, everything falls into place. And if you don't have that, people will call you out. And which I think is, call out culture, there are a lot of difficulties with it, but it's important to know that the people you're speaking to through whatever, social media, traditional media, whatever it is, that whatever story you are telling, it has to be completely authentic, and you have to be able to stand behind it, and really explain why you do what you do, and keep showing it through various actions that you take as a brand.
Absolutely agree with that, 100%. Well said. I think another point too, just on that note of being authentic, there's a lot of greenwashing and just being in packaging and branding. There's a lot of digging and research that you have to do to really understand what materials are making up some of these ways of packaging and shipping products, and understanding the supply chain behind that. And I think to your point of being called out, companies are having to go kind of that extra mile to really understand what, not just products, but even down to packaging and labeling and what's going on in your products to be authentic.
Yeah, Chris, did you have a?
Well, it's just we've always, a lot of conversations kind of heading into this, even though it was a late edition, but it was things like, supply chain and product have become so important in terms of, whether it's factories, packaging, kind of where it's made. And we've always thought about, well, what about kind of the rest of the tech stack, or the corporate environment, the office that people are, or the team is in. And I think, we've already seen that kind of go from, mission, purpose, values of, whether it's a founding team or a brand, and start to kind of go into supply chain. And we're kind of like, well, where is that going to go next? I think, to the point here with Jennifer is that it's already gone to packaging, and I think people are really, really care about that. Certainly in my household, if nowhere else. But it will be, I think we see the vision of in the next, several years that it's going to be kind of more of the ecosystem that's going to matter about kind of who you do business with, how you do business, whether it's globally, abroad, et cetera.
So Jennifer, I have another question for you. Again, for the whole panel, but I'll direct it to Jennifer. So I think I mentioned this to you guys when we talked a week or two ago, but a while ago I talked to Sebastian Kopp, I think, who's the founder of Veja, the sneaker brand, and I asked him, did he think that people bought the shoes because they were sustainable? And he said that was, like we were saying, it was a bonus, but they bought it because they liked the shoes. So Jennifer, I know you guys, had that huge Black Friday day, partially driven by the cause you were going for. But at what point in the purchase process do you think it's the most appealing or the most valuable to talk about your values? Like, is it what brings people, like gets people aware of the brand in the first place, like top of funnel, or is it more like they're already there for other reasons and the sustainability or the activism that involved is like what gets them over the final sort of hump to the purchase? You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And to me, I think it's the whole journey, right? This is like a relationship. You have to, when you start out and you meet somebody, you have to align on your beliefs and if it's a good product and really set that foundation. But then there are these micro moments in between that help build that relationship even stronger and, educate them on, what the brand is about. To the point, and this I think is when you talk about the cherry on top, for Patagonia anyway, and how I see it, is when people go to purchase that jacket after this complete journey, and it's not just about purchasing the jacket, it's also a good feeling about, hey, this means something more than that. This is me trying to save the home planet, or encouraging voting rights, or really being concerned about workers' rights. And so I don't think we can have one without the other. I think it's a full circle, and you're not going to get that in purchase if you don't worry about building that strong relationship up front.
I would say just in some of the studies that we do is it typically usually is price, product, brand, and kind of other attributes to be kind of what we've seen. But I think to Jennifer's point is it really comes into play like once you make that purchase, when you receive the package. Once you make that purchase, how does that brand treat you post-engagement in terms of life cycle marketing, and other touch points? Because I think where we look at like true, activist consumers, really all about brand loyalty. Like that consumer that cares so passionately about something that they care also so passionately about your brand. And I think you always have to draw them in, price, product, the P's of marketing. But I think that element of like, how do you treat that customer after, and then how do you communicate the other almost intangible values that aren't necessarily there are a really, really important part of that. And that's how we kind of weave in some of our purpose and mission in terms of, literacy into kind of taking the journey with the consumer.
I think there are a lot of different thresholds. I will use a paper straw, even though I think they're inferior in terms of functionality to plastic straws. But I would never buy something because it is, it checks all the, environmental inclusivity boxes, but in and of itself is not a very good product. There's also the consumer to consider. When you are talking to an audience that has been so very largely ignored and has been living in a state of lack for so long, they have a different hierarchy of needs too. For ages, I used to live in Tokyo, and I would come back to New York, and I would just buy everything I could get my hands on because there was no way. An extra large in Tokyo is an 8, and it's usually on sale because it's too big for everyone. And so I was like really stuck, and I would come home or come here twice a year and just buy whatever fit me, whatever I could find. And, you know, rather low on my list was, oh, is this, you know, how is this made? Because it was just absolutely necessary. So I think there are a lot of layers to this. I think that there is a savvy that is now bred in the modern consumer, that, you know, there is a bell ringing, whether it's ringing in the back of your head or whether it's at the front of your mind, is dependent on who you are as a person, what your income is, you know, where you're coming from in terms of access to certain things. But I do believe it is, you know, it's becoming more and more important. And I think that people are trying to, it's like kale, you know, you want to work it into your diet somehow, somewhere. And then eventually, you know, you understand that the benefits are, you know, are absolutely necessary to your being.
Yeah, so
And then it's in every meal.
Yeah.
Every smoothies, sides.
It seems like it's a big part of it is just knowing who your customer is and what they value, and you know, hoping there's an alignment there. I was wondering, could you guys tell me sort of how you learn about what your customer cares about? I'm sure you can sort of see implicitly in what they buy and what works for them, but do you do any sort of like surveys or conversations with consumers about things like that?
We mostly just kind of do what we believe in, because we think this is the way things should have always been. And then, you know, we open ourselves to the world, and we want to be a litmus test for the industry, you know, which is still uncertain, even though there's 115 million American women who are being completely ignored by the fashion industry. There's still this ingrained, you know, prejudice, this calcified prejudice against bigger bodies. We're trying to be the litmus test to the industry to say, if you're scared, if you're worried, if it hasn't worked for you before, just watch us. We will show you that it can be done properly. And I think that there's also, you know, a sign to the consumer that this is a changing world. It's much more embracing of a new beauty and a much more broad understanding of what is attractive. And I think that, you know, within that lies a very powerful emotional and psychological prompter and feeling that is very important to consumers, you know, when they are identifying with a brand. You know, if I know that this brand has my back or is paying attention to me, you know, in a category that perhaps I haven't felt before, you know, those are the beginnings of loyalty.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay. I would just say the way we think about kind of consumer, you know, surveys and focus groups are more about building empathy with our customer. I think, you know, there's kind of different types of approaches in terms of building a business, and one, a lot of the founders build it to kind of solve a need that they have. And then a lot of founders are also solving something that is almost a gap in the market. So something that's happening in the market that, you know, is not being solved today. We kind of fall into the latter of that around, you know, kind of financial and payments, et cetera. And so for us, it's really important to build that empathy with our customer, because oftentimes we're not the consumer. So we're not the, you know, 70% of the population that lives paycheck to paycheck. And so I think where we've found a lot of value kind of on the marketing side and building that empathy is to do those surveys to really understand kind of what the pain points, challenges, and perspectives are of our customer. And then I'll be honest, the thing, you know, I spent years at General Mills and kind of typical corporate, you know, big business kind of consumer insights, but the best by far consumer insights I've ever done and we've ever done is simple 10-person focus groups of our actual customers. And it's not a third party, it's actually, you know, the team in a room talking to customers. And there's so many stories that you glean and understand and put yourself in their shoes. And, you know, when my mom took my credit card when I turned 18 and maxed it out, I was like, that's not a story I can get kind of online. That's not a story I can get kind of in my personal experience. And so that's where I really encourage it, or always kind of our team, my team, and others, is really to kind of take that personal step to consumer empathy.
You nailed it with the personal. We've gone through at Patagonia looking at our hang tag systems as far as packaging. and how can we best communicate to our customers? And we do the online surveys and we work with, third parties to determine this, but by far, going into our stores on a global scale and talking to our customers about how do you want to be communicated with in retail, what's important to you, what are you looking at, has really, at the end of the day, driven our decision around how we're going to continue labeling and putting hang tags on our product. So
We could have a whole side conversation
We
about
could.
this.
So, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong. Sezzle is B Corp, right?
We are.
Okay.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask, again, for the whole group, but how do, Jennifer, you mentioned greenwashing earlier, and brands know that this is an appealing thing for people, and so they'll sneak in whatever language they can. And it's not really, clothes and a lot of retail is not like food where, you can't say something's organic if it's not actually organic. I mean, I know those terms are a little vague, but like the FDA does have some certain rules about what you can put on a label and what you can't. A lot of retail doesn't have that. So how valuable are things like being B Corp certified, or there's a million trade organizations that will certify cotton or different materials. How valuable are certifications like that in terms of communicating your sincerity to the customer? Does the customer look at that? Do they see B Corp, and does that play a big part in acquisition? And I'm sure you guys also have other certifications and stuff too.
So I would say the way we looked at B Corp and the certification process, first of all, it's a long process. It's very detailed, and it involves everyone at your company. So don't take it lightly in terms of the process. I think what we realized kind of through it was we've always been a very mission-driven company. And going through the process actually uncovered and revealed a lot in terms of our journey towards kind of being a better company for our customers, our partners, et cetera. And so going through the process, there's actually a whole litany of kind of different aspects. There's really 5 different areas, governance, employees, environment, community, and then customers. And for example, we scored really high on governance, the way and we also scored really high on employees in terms of how we treat and the culture and environment we create. We scored lower, for example, on environment, lower on community. And so what it allowed us to do, though, was we actually we had to move to a public benefit corp, which is all about kind of stakeholder approach. What that does is actually it raises the conversation at the board level. And so that's a new level of involvement, even at the board, beyond kind of the team that they have to have as part of kind of the charter, these conversations. And then the other thing is where we were looking at the environment piece and the community piece, we realized the kind of the gaps and the opportunities in our journey. And so we started an initiative like plant a tree for every new user, and then we also became climate neutral certified. And so I think it was more for us, like we're not quite there of how to figure out how to communicate it, to be perfectly honest. Mm-hmm. But what it's done is internally it's aligned us and helped us with alignment in terms of things that we've always knew we cared about, but hadn't been codified into systems. And so for that was the journey. The journey's worth I forget the saying, but it's all about the journey, not necessarily the destination. For us, that was a really important part of it. But we're always trying to figure out kind of that piece of how do we communicate? Do our customers and community care about this, kind of based on our conversation? We're still learning, right? Like we're still learning, but we did the steps that it took that we felt as a company are important.
I mean, I know because I've talked to several people who are at B Corp companies, and I know that it's a very intense process. So for me, when I see it, like that as a consumer, that will bring me into a brand. But I don't know how much the general public knows about how serious a B Corp certification is. I mean, like you said, it's a lot of work. It's very detailed. Alex and Jennifer, do you have any thoughts on various certifications or third-party kind of validations?
Not on certifications, but the whole sort of greenwashing idea.
Yeah.
In our business and in the change that we're trying to be in this industry, it's incredibly porous. So everyone recognizes that there's a huge consumer base. Everybody wants the cash. But not everybody wants to actually commit to the process of change or to invest in the change, because it has a rather long, it's not a 3-month, 5-month, even 1-year trial process. You have to establish yourself and communicate to the consumer that you now do this and that way more people are welcome to come into your brand and to be part of your brand. So a lot of brands are doing these sort of sideline things. Well, they'll say we're size inclusive, but that means they now do 3 styles in a size that is, you know, A, B, and C, but goes no further. And by the way, if you want to buy it, it's only on the internet. You won't find it in the stores. There are all kinds of performative stances that brands take in order to participate and be able to use those super overused, frankly, buzzwords, you know, like inclusivity. If I have to hear that word one more time, even though I have to use it in order to describe our brand, but it is so overused and misused that, you know, again, this is where the consumer comes in and does a call out and says, you know, those 3 frocks that you've made in 2 sizes bigger than you normally carry that I have to go on the internet to buy, that doesn't make you inclusive.
Well, and like you said, I know it's frustrating because words like inclusivity are useful to describe what you do, so it's like kind of frustrating when they get co-opted.
Yeah.
We've got just a little bit of time left. Jennifer, do you want to have one last thought before we?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would want to add as far as the certifications that I see Patagonia doing is some of the materials that we're working with and supporting companies that are trying to make these certifications more well-known, like regenerative organic cotton and things like that, and just the importance of trying to support them so that we can be in a place to all kind of learn together how can we make B Corp, you know, more important to the consumer, or, you know, some of these other certifications that are out there that we all work so hard to maintain and build.
Yeah. All right, well, I think we're all out of time, but this was a lovely conversation. Thank you all for being here and bearing with my long-winded questions sometimes. But
Thank you,
thank you so
Dan.
much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.